First story. Let me start by saying that I am not a party guy. I'm not antisocial or anything, but I'm the kind of person who enjoys a quiet night in with a book or maybe some Netflix. But sometimes, life throws you into situations where you're forced to be social whether you like it or not. This is the story of how I, a guy with zero DJ experience, ended up controlling the music at my neighbor's house party. It all started on a Saturday afternoon. I live in a decent apartment complex, and I'm the type of neighbor who waves hello but keeps to himself. My direct neighbors, Jess and her boyfriend Mike, were the opposite. They were always hosting BBQs, having friends over, and generally being the life of the building. I never had any real issues with them, except for the occasional loud music late at night, but nothing too extreme. That Saturday, I was in my apartment, just doing some chores when I heard a knock on the door. It was Jess. "Hey, sorry to bother you, but Mike and I are throwing a little party tonight. Just wanted to give you a heads up in case it gets a little loud." "You're welcome to come if you want," she said with her usual bubbly energy. "Thanks for letting me know," I replied, trying to be polite. "I'll probably just stay in, but I appreciate the invite." She smiled, said something like, "Feel free to drop by if you change your mind," and left. I went back to cleaning, fully intending to stay as far away from the party as possible. Fast forward to about 8 p.m., and the music starts. Nothing too crazy at first, just some background tunes and the sounds of people chatting. But by 10 p.m., it was clear the party was in full swing. The music was louder, people were laughing and yelling, and the walls were starting to vibrate. I wasn't annoyed exactly, but I knew there was no chance I'd be getting any sleep anytime soon. Around 10:30, I was on my couch trying to watch a movie with my headphones on when my phone buzzed. It was Jess, texting me. "Hey! Could you do me a huge favor? Our speaker is acting weird, and I remember you mentioning once that you're good with tech. Could you maybe come take a quick look? It'll only take a second." I stared at the message for a minute, debating whether or not to respond. I could have easily ignored it, but I'm a sucker for being helpful, even when I don't want to be. So, against my better judgment, I replied, "Sure, I'll come over in a few." I threw on a hoodie, grabbed my keys, and walked the 10 steps to their door. As soon as Jess saw me, she gave me this huge grin and dragged me inside. The place was packed. There had to be at least 30 people crammed into their 2-bedroom apartment. There was a makeshift bar set up in the kitchen, people dancing in the living room, and loud music blaring from a Bluetooth speaker that was perched on top of a bookshelf. Jess pulled me over to the speaker, which, sure enough, was crackling like it had been overworked. "See? It keeps doing that," she said, pointing at the speaker. I knelt down and checked it out. It wasn't anything too complicated, just an overused speaker with a connection issue. I disconnected it, reset the Bluetooth, and voila, the music was back to normal. "You're a lifesaver," Jess exclaimed, giving me a quick hug before disappearing back into the crowd. I figured my work was done, so I turned to leave, but Mike, who I barely knew, came up to me, clearly tipsy. "Dude, you fixed the music. Awesome. Do you want to DJ for a bit? Our playlist kinda sucks, and I bet you've got some good stuff on your phone." Before I could protest, he handed me his phone, which was connected to the speaker. I tried to give it back, but he was already dancing away. So now I'm standing there, holding this guy's phone, and I have no idea what to do. I don't know half the people at this party, and I definitely didn't want to stick around. But I also didn't want to be rude, so I thought, okay, I'll just throw on a couple of tracks and quietly slip out. Of course, things didn't go that way. I picked a random song from his playlist, some kind of generic pop track, and people kept dancing. No one seemed to notice I wasn't actually a DJ, so I figured I was safe. But then the song ended, and people started yelling requests. Apparently, by just standing near the speaker, I had become the designated DJ. People were shouting song titles at me from every corner of the room. Someone wanted something upbeat, another wanted something chill, and a group of girls kept asking for old-school hip-hop. I had no idea how to please everyone, so I just started randomly picking songs from the playlist. To my surprise, people were actually getting into it. At some point, someone handed me a beer, and I figured, well, I guess I'm staying for a bit. For the next 2 hours, I was stuck behind that speaker, trying to keep the music going while dodging requests for songs I'd never heard of. I didn't hate it, but I was definitely out of my element. It was a weird feeling, being the guy in control of the music at a party I hadn't even planned on attending. The funny part is, the more songs I picked, the more people seemed to think I was some kind of musical genius. They kept coming up to me, telling me how great the vibe was, and asking me how I knew exactly what to play. The truth was, I was just pressing random buttons and hoping for the best. Around midnight, I finally managed to pass off the DJ duties to someone else. I slipped out quietly, headed back to my apartment, and collapsed on the couch, utterly exhausted. The next morning, I woke up to a string of texts from Jess. "Thanks so much for saving the party last night. Everyone loved the music. You were amazing. We owe you big time." I smiled, shaking my head at the absurdity of it all. I never wanted to be the DJ, but somehow, I ended up being the hero of the night. Not exactly what I had in mind for a quiet Saturday, but hey, sometimes life has other plans. And that, my friends, is how I accidentally became the DJ at my neighbor's party without even meaning to. Second story. I've always prided myself on being a pretty low-maintenance guy. I like routine, and my weekends are usually filled with small errands, nothing exciting. But sometimes, even the simplest errands can turn into a complete mess. I never thought something as mundane as a trip to the grocery store could become the most stressful experience of my week. It was a typical Saturday afternoon. My fridge was empty, and I needed to restock on the basics: eggs, milk, bread, the usual. So I grabbed my keys, put on some sneakers, and headed out to the local grocery store. It's the kind of place where I know exactly where everything is, and I can be in and out in less than 20 minutes. But as soon as I pulled into the parking lot, I knew something was off. It was packed. Cars were circling like vultures, trying to find parking. I figured maybe there was a sale or something, but I wasn't in the mood to figure it out. After what felt like forever, I finally found a spot way in the back. I grabbed a cart and made my way into the store, instantly regretting my decision. The place was chaos. People everywhere. Kids running around, shopping carts crashing into each other, and the lines, oh God, the lines. They stretched down the aisles like some post-apocalyptic scene. But I was already there, and I wasn't about to turn back empty-handed. I pushed my way through the crowd, trying to stick to my list. I figured I'd get in and get out as quickly as possible. But every aisle was packed, and every time I reached for something, it was either sold out or the last item was snatched right in front of me. I thought about leaving, but my stubbornness got the better of me. I mean, how hard could it be to grab a few groceries, right? Things really went downhill when I got to the dairy section. I was reaching for a carton of milk when someone bumped into me, causing me to drop it. The carton hit the floor, burst open, and milk splattered everywhere. Before I could even react, an employee rushed over with a mop and gave me this look, like I had just murdered his family. "Sir, you're going to need to be more careful," he said with barely concealed irritation. "I'm so sorry, it just slipped," I stammered, trying to help clean up. He waved me off, muttering something under his breath, and I slinked away in embarrassment, grabbing another carton and trying to avoid eye contact with everyone around me. I should have taken that as a sign to leave, but no, I was determined to finish my shopping. As I was moving toward the bread aisle, my phone buzzed. It was my girlfriend, Sarah. "Hey, can you grab some avocados? I'm thinking of making guacamole tonight," the text read. I groaned. The produce section was a war zone, but I figured I could handle grabbing a couple of avocados. How hard could it be? When I got there, it was even worse than I'd imagined. People were fighting over the last decent-looking vegetables, and I had to practically elbow my way through to the avocado display. Of course, all that was left were these rock-hard, unripe avocados. I picked up a few, squeezing them, hoping to find one that wasn't a brick. No luck. I was about to give up when a woman next to me spoke up. "Those are never going to ripen in time for tonight," she said, eyeing my selection. "I know," I sighed. "But I promised my girlfriend I'd get some." She gave me a sympathetic smile and suggested, "You could try the frozen aisle. They have pre-sliced frozen avocados there." I blinked. Frozen avocados? That was a thing? I thanked her and made my way to the frozen food section, still unsure if frozen avocados were even worth it. As soon as I turned the corner, I saw it, a small section of frozen avocado slices, tucked between bags of frozen berries. I grabbed a bag and threw it into my cart. Mission accomplished. At this point, I figured I had everything I needed, and it was time to make my escape. But as I made my way to the checkout, I realized I was missing one thing: toilet paper. Classic. I couldn't go home without it, so I begrudgingly pushed my cart toward the paper goods aisle. Of course, when I got there, the shelf was completely empty. No toilet paper. None. I stood there for a moment, staring at the barren shelves, wondering if this was a sign from the universe that I should just give up on the day entirely. But then I spotted something, one lone pack of toilet paper, perched on the very top shelf, just out of reach. I looked around, trying to find a store employee to help, but everyone was busy. So, being the problem solver I am, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I climbed onto the bottom shelf, trying to reach the pack. Now, I'm not the most athletic guy, but I figured I could manage this one small climb. I was wrong. Just as I reached for the toilet paper, the shelf gave a little wobble, and before I knew it, I lost my balance. I didn't fall completely, but I knocked over a display of paper towels in the process, causing a mini avalanche in the aisle. As I scrambled to my feet, an older lady nearby gave me this look of pure judgment. I mumbled an apology, grabbed the toilet paper, and made a beeline for the checkout. By the time I got to the register, I was a sweaty, flustered mess. The cashier, who couldn't have been older than 18, scanned my items with the most bored expression I'd ever seen. As I went to pay, I realized I'd forgotten my reusable bags in the car. Perfect! I asked for a couple of plastic bags, and of course, they were out of those too. So I ended up carrying all my groceries in my arms, juggling the milk, bread, and that stupid bag of frozen avocados. As I made my way to the exit, I thought the nightmare was finally over. But just as I stepped outside, a gust of wind hit me, and one of the grocery receipts I had tucked under my arm flew out into the parking lot. Like an idiot, I chased after it. I didn't really need the receipt, but at that point, I think I was just desperate for one small victory. I never caught the receipt. It flew off into the abyss, and I stood there in the parking lot, defeated, clutching my groceries like a madman. When I finally got home, I dropped everything on the kitchen counter and collapsed on the couch. My phone buzzed again, another text from Sarah. "Thanks for getting the avocados. Can't wait for dinner tonight, smiley face." I stared at the message for a second before bursting into laughter. All of that chaos for a bag of frozen avocados. So yeah, that's how my simple grocery run turned into a full-blown disaster. I've never taken toilet paper for granted since. Third story. It all started as a casual plan between friends. You know, one of those spontaneous road trips you talk about for weeks but never actually do. Except this time, we did it. The plan was simple: 4 of us, me, Jake, Sarah, and Tom, would pile into my car, drive out to this cabin Sarah's family owned near a lake, spend a weekend relaxing, and then head back. A break from work, from the city, from life. But nothing about that weekend went according to plan. What we thought would be a fun, relaxing getaway turned into one long, stress-filled nightmare. The first sign of trouble came before we even left. I had just finished loading the last of the bags into the car when Jake strolled over, looking sheepish. "Hey, man, small problem," he said, scratching the back of his head. "I kinda forgot to get the oil changed in my car, and I think it's low." I glanced at my watch. We were supposed to leave in 30 minutes, and the drive was at least 5 hours. But fine, I thought, no big deal, we'll just use my car. After all, I'd just had mine serviced the week before. No problem, right? Wrong. We hit the road around noon, with music blasting and spirits high. The first couple of hours were smooth sailing. We laughed, we shared stories, we sang along terribly to the radio. It was shaping up to be the perfect road trip until we hit the back roads. About an hour away from the cabin, the GPS directed us onto this narrow, winding road through a dense forest. I wasn't too worried at first, I'd driven in the country before. But then it started to rain. Not just a drizzle, but a full-on downpour, the kind that makes you squint even with the wipers on full blast. To make matters worse, Sarah, who was navigating, informed us that we were officially off the grid. No cell service, no GPS, nothing. We had the directions saved offline, but let me tell you, following a tiny blue dot on a barely visible dirt road in the middle of nowhere, while rain pounds your windshield, is a special kind of stress. And then, of course, the car started making a weird noise. At first, it was just a faint whine, nothing alarming. But then it grew louder. A scraping sound, like something was dragging underneath the car. We pulled over to check, and sure enough, one of the straps holding a bag on the roof had come loose and was dragging on the ground. Easy fix, right? Well, when I got out to fix it, I realized I had parked in the mud. And when I say mud, I mean thick, soupy, swamp-like mud. Within seconds, my shoes were drenched, and I was slipping around like a newborn deer trying to walk. We got the strap fixed, but by the time we were ready to go, the car wouldn't budge. The wheels spun uselessly in the muck, sending mud spraying everywhere. "Are you kidding me?" Tom groaned, kicking at the mud. We all tried to stay calm, but the situation was pretty bleak. There we were, in the middle of nowhere, stuck in the mud, with no cell service and the rain still pouring down. Sarah suggested we try pushing the car, which seemed like our only option. So there we were, for city kids, knee-deep in mud, trying to push my car out of a ditch. We pushed, and pushed, and pushed, and nothing. The car wouldn't move. Jake slipped at one point and fell face-first into the mud, which would have been hilarious if the situation weren't so dire. Finally, after what felt like hours, we managed to get the car unstuck. Soaking wet, covered in mud, and exhausted, we piled back in and kept driving, silent except for the sound of the rain. When we finally reached the cabin, it was dark. The place looked more like something out of a horror movie than the cozy retreat Sarah had promised. The windows were boarded up, and the roof looked like it had seen better days. We unloaded the car, still drenched, and made our way inside. The cabin smelled musty, like it hadn't been aired out in years. The electricity was spotty, flickering on and off, and the water wasn't running. Great. We tried to make the best of it, lighting some candles and settling in for the night. But none of us could shake the feeling that the weekend was already cursed. The next morning, we decided to go out and explore the lake, figuring we could salvage the trip with some fishing or swimming. But when we got down to the water, we were greeted by a giant no swimming sign, warning of algae blooms. So, no swimming. Fine, we thought. We'll just fish. Except, of course, we forgot to bring bait. And the only store nearby was closed for the weekend. We tried using bread, but we didn't catch a single fish. After a couple of hours, we gave up and headed back to the cabin, dejected. That night, things went from bad to worse. We were sitting around a campfire, trying to stay optimistic, when we heard this loud crash from inside the cabin. We rushed in to find that part of the ceiling had caved in. Water was dripping through a hole, soaking the floor and ruining half of our stuff. We scrambled to move everything, but the damage was done. We spent the rest of the night trying to patch up the hole with a top, but by then, our spirits were completely broken. The final straw came the next day when we tried to leave. We packed up early, ready to put the nightmare weekend behind us. But when I went to start the car, it wouldn't turn over. Dead battery. At that point, I just sat there in silence, staring at the dashboard. I couldn't believe this was happening. It was like the universe was conspiring against us. We had to wait another 3 hours before someone finally drove by and helped jumpstart the car. The drive home was quiet. None of us spoke much. We were too tired, too defeated. What was supposed to be a relaxing getaway had turned into the weekend from hell. We didn't even bother unpacking when we got back. I just collapsed on my bed, still covered in mud and sweat. So, yeah. That's the story of how a simple road trip with friends turned into a week-long disaster of mishaps and bad luck. Moral of the story? Maybe stick to weekend plans that don't involve cabins in the woods and back roads with no cell service.